Who wins a fight? The warrior who is biggest, fastest, and strongest. And while only a lucky few are born with all three of these physical virtues, there is a way they can be acquired. Horses. From before Rome to after Waterloo, the advantage a mounted man has over his enemy is incredible. He can strike from height with the weight of his mount behind him, and flee when the going gets tough. To have a man on a horse is enough to win a fight. To have an army on horses is enough to win a war. Empires as divergent as Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great have been built on the saddled back of strong and speedy horses. And throughout the old world, it was apparent to those who wished to conquer, good horses would be needed. But though the advantage of cavalry is obvious, not all ancient kingdoms had access to the tanks of their times. Han China was the dynasty that ruled East Asia from around 200 BC to 200 AD, making it a contemporary of Rome. Unlike the Caesars though, the Han had no good source of horses. The local breeds were small and scraggly, and the land was not well suited to their grazing. Not only did this make conquest more difficult, it left the Han vulnerable to neighbors who had superior steeds. For decades, mounted nomads menaced the realm's northern frontiers, with Han soldiers unable to chase them off. When Emperor Wu took power, it was decided this humiliation could not continue. Horses fit for the heavenly kingdom were needed, and if unable to be bought, then they would need to be taken. This is the story of the Han quest for heavenly horses. So what were these so-called heavenly horses? Their majestic name was first given by a Han diplomat who had been impressed by their appearance in his travels. They were called the Fergana, a powerfully built horse originating from Central Asia. Though proportionally short compared to some other bloodlines, they're powerfully built and much superior to Han breeds. One notable attribute of this old species was that they were known to sweat blood when the horses were working. If not divine, this unusual trait may seem mystical, and could explain why in Chinese art, these horses are often depicted as red. In 104 BC, Emperor Wu of the Han desired these Fergana horses so that they may improve their own bloodline, and sent an expedition to see if they could be acquired. At this time, the principal power of Central Asia was Greek. Only 200 years before, Alexander the Great had conquered much of Central Asia up to India. And though his empire was united only briefly, the Greek influence in the successor states remained. The remnants of one of these empires was known as the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, or to the Chinese as the Daiyuan, which is how I will refer to them from now on to avoid that hyphen. So, to sum up this setup, 100 years before Christ, a Chinese dynasty was seeking out a Greek kingdom in Central Asia to buy horses. History can be fascinating. So, off the emperor's agents went. Of course, this was more than just a trade mission for the Han. For the emperor, it was a matter of national security. The nomads of the north, and what is today's Mongolia and Siberia, had long resisted the Han, and what's more, caused considerable damage through their mounted raiding. Without suitable horses, Chinese armies were unable to catch or even stop these raids. As a measure of how much the Han valued this deal, among their possessions the envoys were sent with 1,000 pieces of gold, as well as a whole horse made of gold to barter for these heavenly mounts. To the Daiyun, however, not all that glitters is gold. To them, the Fergana horses were their most valuable resource, a national treasure. For all the reasons I mentioned in the intro, horses were important for war as well as work, and they were not to be easily parted with. For the emperor's offer was not as tempting to the Greeks as it may have been to others. The Daiyun were in a rare position among nations, even up to the 19th century, that they had goods that the Chinese wanted. Normally the receiver of nations desperate for tea and silks, it was the Han who had desperately come to the Daiyun for horses. There had been deals for horses before, of course, though this proposed deal seemed to dwarf all others. Emperor Wu wanted enough horses to build a cavalry from scratch. But he was only offering the same eastern goods that they were already flush with. Why would the Daiyun give up what they had treasured for more of what they already had? Doubtlessly understanding that the Han may resort to force if they could not have what they wanted via diplomacy, the Dayun were still not afraid. There was some distance between their kingdom and the realm of the Han, and they reasoned that distance was their best defense. In their words, "The Han is far away from us, and on several occasions has lost men in the saltwater wastes between our country and China. Yet if the Han parties go farther north, they will be harassed by the Xiongnu, while if they try to go south, they'll suffer from lack of water and fodder. Moreover, there are many places along the route where there are no cities whatsoever, and they are apt to run out of provisions. The Han embassies that have come to us are made up of only a few hundred men, and yet they are always short of food, and over half the men die on the journey. Under such circumstances, how could the Han possibly send a large army against us? What have we to worry about? Furthermore, the horses of Ershi are one of the most valuable treasures of the state." Angered at the rebuff, the Han envoys took back the golden horse they had brought and smashed it upon the ground, cursing the men of Dayun. Enraged for their own part by this Han arrogance, the Dayun nobles arranged for the Han envoys to be killed and their goods seized. As predicted, learning of the trade mission's failure, Emperor Wu sent an army of 6,000 cavalry and 20,000 infantry to punish these barbarians and seize the heavenly horses. It was time to see if distance would triumph over will. Well, it did. Much as the Dayun had predicted, the Han army proved too large for the supplies they'd been able to muster. Meeting the hostile states that rimmed the Gobi Desert betwixt them and the Dayun, the Han were unable to buy supplies and to replenish their stocks. Desperate for food, the Han would then attack these border cities, placing them under siege. This, however, drained the expedition's two most precious resources even further: time and food. And before the army could even overcome these petty conflicts, they were reduced to starvation. The survivors were forced to limp back home. But Emperor Wu refused to accept this humiliation as final. If the dynasty were to lose face to these mere horse traders, enemies previously overawed may return for vengeance. Overruling the objections of his advisors, he ordered a second force to be sent to punish the Dayun and capture their heavenly horses. Showing that they had at least learned from their previous expedition, the tooth and the tail of this new column were vastly expanded. The prisons were combed for conscripts and mercenaries contracted. In 102 BC, an army of 30,000 cavalry and 60,000 infantry set out, supported by 120,000 pack animals to carry supplies. This was equivalent to some of the very largest armies that Rome had ever raised. The sheer size of this army intimidated into submission the border states which had previously impeded their army, and the Han forces were able to cross the wastes to reach the Dayun capital. Still though, the crossing had proved taxing. Over half the army that had been sent perished for disease and desertion. At the Dayun capital of Ershi, Han engineers quickly set to work blockading the city. The river that passed through the city was diverted, leaving the city without water. The Greek city was ringed by Chinese troops, preventing any supplies from entering its walls. Desperate, the Dayun mounted an attack. The legendary Fergana horses were mounted, and the cavalry charged out. But even these horses of heaven were unable to lift the siege, and were defeated by Han crossbowmen. Eventually, the same nobles of Dayun who had refused the Han envoys decided to offer their surrender. They beheaded their king and sent the head to the Han general, Li Guangli. The nobles offered the army all the supplies it would need if it left, and they also warned that they would kill all their horses if he refused to leave. General Li's own army was depleted, and with the goal now within his grasp, he agreed. He took 3,000 horses and provisions for his army, and, before leaving, had a noble enthroned on the Dayun throne who had shown the envoys kindness. But, unfortunately for the Han, the return journey was no shorter. To make matters worse, the army was marred by corruption. The officers held in contempt their prisoner army, and hoarded much of the food supplies for themselves. General Li's army suffered mass desertions and starvation that tainted their victory. Returning to China, General Li had only 10,000 men of the almost 100,000 that had set out, and 1,000 horses fit for service. But, at last, the Han had their horses. Of those they had demanded from the Dayun, About 30 were considered superior horses, and they were prized for breeding, with the remaining more average mounts being used for cavalry. In addition, as tribute, the Daiyun sent the Han Emperor 2 beautiful horses a year, as well as the seed for the lucerne hay that the horses were used to eating. The Han treated their prizes well, the heavenly horses being a coveted mount in China for the next 1,000 years. By the time that they are gradually phased out for newer bloodlines, the Tang dynasty had over 430,000 heavenly horses in their cavalry. The loss of so many men was seen as worth the cost to Emperor Wu, who finally had his horses, who would serve the Han until the end of their dynasty. With the Fergana horses, they finally had the strength and speed that leaders from Caesar to Custer have coveted, and the Heavenly Kingdom could finally have a bloodline worthy of its name. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'm trying to get a history story out every Friday, so if you like to hear these tales, please subscribe. And let me know in the comments how you would keep the blood off your clothes if you had to ride one of these horses.